Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, members of the Senate, the bill before you engrossed Senate Bill 1 at its nuts and bolts level amends two existing sections of the West Virginia Code, which are located in Article 1A of Chapter 21. Those are Sections 3 and 4. And it enacts a new article in the code, which would be located as designated as Section 5, Article 5G in Chapter 21, containing 8 new sections of law and entitled as the West Virginia Workplace Freedom Act. Before discussing precisely what the bill does, I want to mention a few things that it does not do. This bill does not in any way prohibit collective bargaining. The bill does not prevent any person from joining a union if he or she chooses to do so. It preserves and expressly preserves that freedom. The bill does not and would not affect any existing collective bargaining agreements. What this bill does do is simply enshrine into law, into the law of our state, a fundamental principle of freedom. The freedom that a person may not be compelled to join a union or to pay dues to a union as a condition of having a job. After the effective date of this bill, if it's passed into law, it will be unlawful in West Virginia for a collective bargaining agreement to require that as a condition of a person's employment, he or she become a member of or pay dues to a labor union. Every county economic development coordinator in West Virginia that I've ever spoken to has told me that this is a measure we need in West Virginia. They believe that there are companies that don't choose to look at West Virginia because West Virginia is not a right-to-work state, because there is no freedom of the type described and prescribed by the bill in the workplace in West Virginia. We have studied and debated this measure carefully. We have a study from WVU, our flagship university in this state, which concludes that the passage of this bill will reduce unemployment in this state. Concludes that the passage of this bill, Mr. President, will increase the gross domestic product of this state. This state that we love and hold dear is and has been for some time last 50th in the entire country in its rate of labor force participation. Why is that? Is that because people here won't work? No. It's because there aren't jobs here. We have the best, hardest working people in this state that can be found anywhere in the world. And it is a tragedy. It is a tragedy that they don't have employment opportunities in this state. Passage of this bill will lower the rate of unemployment and increase employment opportunities. Why aren't there jobs here? It's not because the people of this state won't work. That's not true. The reason is that for too long, this state has had an inhospitable business climate. This bill is one of many measures that this body will consider that are designed to change that, to raise our labor force participation rate. West Virginia, this state that we love, all of us, and hold dear, for which we have taken an oath to serve, is the only state in the United States of America that has fewer people living in it today than lived there 50 years ago. Every other state in this country has enjoyed population growth, some more than others, but not here. Why not? Have people left our state because they don't love it as we do? No. People have left this state because they've had to find employment. That's why people have left this state. I support this bill because I believe the study from West Virginia University, our flagship university, that over time, this will increase employment opportunities in this state. It will lower unemployment. The people who have left West Virginia, Mr. President, have not done so because they choose or desire to be farther from their families, from their parents and their grandparents. They've had to pursue the American dream that we all share, to find employment. We must act. We must act. I know this issue is difficult and volatile. I know people have impassioned views about this question in this chamber and without. And I'm sure that we are going to engage in, as we should today, a spirited debate about the merits of this legislation. But I believe it will move West Virginia forward. And that's what I, and I hope all of us, are here to do. Mr. President, I'll leave it there for the moment. I would like to reserve the right to close debate, but I'd be happy to yield to any questions members may have.
Questions on passage of the bill? Is there discussion? The Senator from Marshall.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'll be brief because I think this bill has been discussed plenty in committee, in the public forums, in the media, etc. But the bill is called, workplace freedom. And that sounds good when people say, all right, who can be against workplace freedom? We're all for freedom. But this bill, I submit, the word free is accurate in describing it. I would call it more of a free loader bill rather than a freedom bill. And let me explain why. Under current law, the federal law requires that in these collective bargaining agreements, that the union must represent every single employee in that unit, in that business, in that workplace, whether they pay dues or not. So at the end of the day, you're getting the benefit of something without having to pay for it. I submit to you, Mr. President, that is not the American way. I belong to my local Chamber of Commerce back home. Every January, I got to write them a check and pay my dues. Used to belong to a country club. Get out and play a few more rounds of golf before I started having more children, and my time became a little more limited. But I wasn't allowed to go out on that green and tee up and play unless I paid. That is the American way, Mr. President. You don't get something for nothing. And that's what this bill certainly encourages. It encourages breaking up unions for no other reason than for political reasons that undermine the attack on unions. The unions that have built our state, that have built our country through the work and blood and every benefit in our communities, through health insurance, retirement benefits, workplace safety, all negotiated by unions that have benefited us all. It benefited us all. So for that, Mr. President, I think this bill in and of itself is wrong because it encourages people to get something for nothing. And that is not the West Virginia way. That is not the American way. Unions have built this country, and they are under attack. But to suggest because our population decline and other things have occurred misses the point of lack of diversification of our economy in this state to provide other opportunities for those children. They'll tell you we have low workforce participation, and we do, but I can tell you the testimony that I've listened to would suggest, from Keith Burdett, who's our Secretary of Revenue or of Commerce here in the state, has said that it's not an issue when he goes out to talk to people. It is not an issue. It wasn't an issue to Procter & Gamble. It wasn't an issue to Macy's. It wasn't an issue to Toyota. It wasn't an issue to any of those Cabela's up our way. They're looking for a skilled, educated, trained, and sober workforce. And that's where we need to be directing our efforts, Mr. President, is improving the quality of our workforce by providing educational opportunities, apprenticeship programs, rehabilitation for those who become addicted to drugs. Those are the things that will move us forward. I also heard, Governor Kasich, who was invited here, I think, from the Senator of Ohio, invited him here last year and addressed your caucus, I believe, at a downstairs talking about the balanced budget amendment. And the question was posed to him by an employer, or by one of the reporters, excuse me. What do you think about right to work? He says it's not an issue in Ohio. Ohio has a fairly robust economy that through the recession has had more job growth than just about any other state in the union, and it is not an issue to him because it's the truth. He told the truth. I've heard, I serve on an economic development organization up in the northern part of the state where we've been judged in many instances in some of the reports due to the Marcellus gas and also the significant coal reserves that we have up there. And they'll say, Jeff, how on earth did you get all that coal and gas up in your neck of the woods? And I said, good leadership will do that, Mr. President. The truth of the matter is, we've had billions of dollars being invested into my backyard. Chevron, Antero, Southwest Energy is going to invest $20-some billion in our neck of the woods. I was at the press conference with the governor a few months ago, this summer. They're not saying we're not coming here and investing because it's right to work. They're saying we're coming here because you got what we need, and that's gas. And that's why we're coming here. They need flat land. That is the biggest challenge we have, is flat land. That's why I was glad to see the governor talk about the development down in the Boone County, I believe, in Logan County, where the Hobet mine, where that will create some opportunities because they'll have flat land and infrastructure. We need to be focusing on increasing our workforce by education and skilled and training and building infrastructure. Broadband, one of the most important things we can be doing. Not passing things that divide us in this state and divide us and attack unions. And that's what it's about. Mr. President, it's a bill that, frankly, in the states that have done it, have passed it, haven't worked. I look around my community and I see an awful lot of folks coming here to work in West Virginia in the gas fields over the last couple of years. I see an awful lot of license plates from Oklahoma, Arkansas, Louisiana, Texas. I'm sure the senator from Brooke and the senator from Ohio see much of the same thing. All the states that are right to work are sending their people here. They must not have enough work down there where they're working because they're all coming here. Again, building our workforce is how we're going to move our state forward, not reducing wages of those in the workplace that are here. The studies that have been submitted out there are flawed. Look at Wisconsin, look at Kansas, look at some of the states, Oklahoma, that have passed right to work, and their economies are not robust, Mr. President. They are not robust. So to suggest that the passage of this bill will be a silver bullet of any kind is wrong. It encourages freeloaders. It encourages folks to get something for nothing. And for that, Mr. President, I urge the rejection of this bill. Thank you.
Further discussion, the senator from Jefferson.
Thank you, Mr. President. I want to return to the explanation of the bill, Senate Bill 1, by the Judiciary Chair. Mr. President, we've all seen, and I'm sure the public here or at home watching this on webcam, have seen everything from Perry Mason, if you're old enough, to Judge Judy. Raise your hand and tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. I don't take issue that what the judiciary said had truth in it. But it was not the whole truth. You need to look at the whole truth here. And I very likely will not persuade anyone how they're going to vote on this, but the public needs to hear this, Mr. President. Because the Judiciary Chairman laid out in his explanation of the bill that this is the silver bullet, saying that unemployment is high, and it is in West Virginia. This is one of the worst economic times in our lifetime with the downturn in energy prices. Coal mines are closing down. Many or most may very well go bankrupt. This bill will not change that. That is driven by international energy prices. Today, we have a problem with natural gas. The price is extremely low. In fact, so low, they can hardly maintain the wells. There's talk of shutting in existing wells, but they still have to pay for the lines whether they're pumping gas through it or not. This is not a magic bullet, as some have alluded to you that it is. Forbes magazine, and this was talked about a great deal during November interims, that West Virginia wasn't a good place to do business. In their comparison, some of it fair, some of it not. But the number one reason that Forbes said West Virginia is not a very good place to do business, they quoted, it is, we only have a 19% post-high school education level in this state. 19% of people do something after high school in the state of West Virginia. Forbes said that is the number one reason. Will this bill do anything to change that? No. Are we talking about that? No. We have the most divisive bill I've ever seen here today, and the illusion that this is the magic bullet to lower unemployment, put people back to work, and make West Virginia rosy. That is nothing but an illusion, and it is clearly not the whole truth. Mr. President, I'm from an area state and can speak to growth. What the rest of the state I wish that my area of the state, the tip of the Eastern Panhandle, I am from the very tip, near Harper's Ferry. What drives our economy is the Metro D.C. area. It's driven by something out of our state. It's our location close to that mega economy in Baltimore and D.C. My district, when the entire state of West Virginia grew by 5,000 people, from 2000 to 2010, the entire state grew 5,000 people. That's all, out of 1.8 million people. My Senate district grew by 36,000 over that period of time. 5,000 total states, somebody's losing population. But that's not driven by right to work, I can assure you. It's the economy in our area. Has nothing to do with right to work. Secretary Burdett from Commerce spoke of this illusion, and he specifically said he did not want to give the illusion it's like a television ad. It's not that's what right to work is. It's an illusion to tell people, and it's disingenuous to tell people that this is going to do it. This is going to turn our state around. One of the biggest problems in West Virginia, we don't have large, flat tracts of ground. Berkeley County won the bidding for Procter & Gamble, and welcome. It's great for our state. It's great for our area. But we're not because we're extremely special up there. There was 500 acres of flat ground right on Interstate 81 with water and sewer. That's why they're there. They said that's why they're there. They couldn't find 500 acres of flat ground that close to the interstate with public water and sewer. So there are other factors here. It's not right to work. By the way, Procter & Gamble didn't care whether we were right to work. Macy's didn't care whether we were right to work. And Secretary Burdett said he has not had one company, to his knowledge, walk away from negotiations with the development office because this state is not a right-to-work state. Not one. Not one. Judiciary Chairman said there will be, that the WVU, pristine university, that report says there will be an uptick in the economy. And there will be a lowering of unemployment. Wow, that sounds great to me. You've got my attention. But I'm going to tell you the whole truth. The whole truth is that report said that uptick, lowering unemployment and increasing the possibility that we will grow in West Virginia and grow our economy is 0.4% less than 0.5% uptick. The downside in that report, and we had many speakers from a different vantage, all agreed that when other states went to right to work, their state's overall pool of wages went down 17%. With the possibility of less than 0.5% growth, these reports all say the likelihood that our state's wages will go down 17%. That's for your children. That's for your grandchildren. They all said union membership in states that went to right to work went down 20%. Okay, I'm personally not a union member. My dad was president of a local union. What, does that make any difference? Yes. That puts stress on health care plans for thousands and tens of thousands of people that belong to these various unions. It also puts stress on their pension systems because you have less people. So this bill clearly, we're trading, and I've heard the term tool in a toolbox. I'm not sure it's going to do any good, can't promise you that, but we need that tool in a toolbox. Well, that tool in that toolbox is not worth the chance, to me, to lower wages by 17%, lower union membership, which hurts health care plans and pensions by 20% lowering. This is what happened. This is the reality in other states. And again, Mr. Chairman, yes, we're putting a tool in the toolbox, but at what cost? At what cost to our future generations here in West Virginia? And we must measure that. We must measure that. In every piece of legislation we do, we always have competing interests. Well, the competing interest on this issue is our citizens and their wages and their health care programs and their pensions, which all of the reports, all of them, even the WVU report, tells you the likelihood is very high that wages will be reduced 17% and union membership 20%, which hurts pensions and health care plans. I urge rejection of this bill.
Senator from Logan.
Mr. President, I know a lot of people's got a lot of things they'd like to say, so I will try to be brief. You know, last session I spoke about prevailing wages. And I mentioned to this body how uncertain I thought the bill was. I couldn't go home and tell a young man or a young lady what their new rate of pay was. That was a challenge to me. If you look at my votes, I've voted a lot of bills since I've been here since 2011 in November, so-called pro-business votes. I've also voted when I thought that the working people in West Virginia was challenged. They were so-called labor votes. But this bill, I questioned. We have these surveys and studies from people to check this and that. But since I've been here, I've asked this body for a job, a session, and everybody else I talk to, other than sometimes what we're doing here, they think I'm right. I've asked to bring in the leaders of all of our industries for a session on jobs. We go back a few months ago, even a few years ago. The auto industry was challenged. Our federal government stepped up and bailed them out. I even mentioned to a lot of people when our coal industry was going down, why don't we meet as legislators with our federal people and ask for a bailout when they required we had scrubbers, when the selenium issues were all there, and all these multi-million-dollar bills were put out there for either the companies to impose or shut down. We did not, in respect to the workers of West Virginia and the industries that has kept this state alive and kept the nation alive, we did not step up as strong as we should have stepped up. Look at the auto industry now. They got stimulus money, they got bailed out, everybody's happy, we're selling cars. The steel industry, we let it go. I told somebody the other day, I said, steel probably drives the pistons more than even coal. When you've got steel markets, you have to have metallurgical coal. It provides the timber industry to build houses. It takes care of the medical foundations. But we, as legislators, want to just put a bill into effect totally with uncertainty as to what it would do. And as a legislator, what challenges me and bothers me more than anything, I listen to the pros and the cons of all this legislation. They're this far apart. How can somebody give you data on the pro side and somebody 10 minutes later can stand up on the con side and the information be so, it don't even correspond? We look at the data, some states with right-to-work legislation seem to be doing good. Some seems to be not doing good. But like on the prevailing wages, is this the path that we think West Virginia should go? We have the coal reserves. We have the gas reserves. We have the technology. We have the hands-on, the handcraft people that work. As legislators, in working with our federal group and employing their federal support, we should be finding out, how do we produce coal better, cheaper, faster? How do we take other, we've been cutting our tourism. It's plain to see we need to increase it. Michigan, nobody wanted to go to Michigan. They advertised pure Michigan, and now it's the 7th most traveled state, and they can't touch us with industry of tourism. We sit back, we watch other people employ greatness, success, and we've got everything to work with. So I don't think this bill takes us to the next level. And as President of the Senate and the Governor and the Speaker of the House and all of us legislative leaders, we should be bringing in Senator Manchin, Senator Capito, and our other delegation to totally sit down and bring in the leaders of all of our industries to find out, how do we become the best because we can be the best? And just simply passing uncertain pieces of legislation one after another does not get us to the point that we need to be. My job as a legislator, and I've said this before, in judiciary, sometimes I draw criticism. I held press conferences for union miners in my area, non-union miners. My job was to speak at every EPA hearing, every DEP hearing, be there to give you an opportunity on Monday to get up and feed your family as a working member. I'll leave the leadership and unionism up to Cecil Roberts in the UMWA, Mr. Hall, and all these other people. That's fine. I may have a preference. I think there's a balance that's needed to where everybody has an opportunity to do the right thing and absorb and have the right wages for your family. But us do not put the workers of West Virginia on the uncertainty path. And I was glad when I got home after speaking about the uncertainty prevailing wages that our so-called flagship newspaper, it looked like I may have wrote the story. It was talking about the uncertainty of the prevailing wages. And I was glad to tell my wife I said something correct because the newspaper said I did without the fact that it was to be proven. It was very uncertain. It's still there to be looked at again according to legislation possibilities. But all I ask you people is search your heart and your mind. Do we want to take the time to bring the leaders in to put this state on the right path? Or do we want to keep passing legislation that once we leave here, the uncertainty level puts us in a quagmire to where nobody wants to invest anything? Right now, you couldn't get a dime investment in the coal industry for most people because the uncertainty of production levels, the uncertainty of price. Why are we not sitting down with the leaders and find out how we can fix some of those problems? EPA rules will always be there, but the more pressure that you put, and I don't think we put enough. I've been to D.C. I can prove I've been to D.C. more than any other elected official in West Virginia on behalf of the working class of people. I've spoken in the halls of Congress. I've done it since 1998 as a county commissioner, and I'm not ashamed to stand up for the working class people in West Virginia. But Mr. President, members of this body, all I ask you is search your heart and your mind. Do we need to extend this out and take a common sense approach and look at what's best for all the workers of West Virginia and give everybody the right to have a quality life? Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator from Greenbrier.
Thank you, Mr. President. Most of you know how I feel about this. Workers' freedom. Political language is designed to make lies sound truthful and murder respectable, and to give an appearance of solidarity to solidity to pure wind. George Orwell wrote those words in his famous book, 1984. Most of you read that book while in high school. Orwell told of a world where words said one thing, but they actually meant something else. And he called that newspeak. It's my belief today that we're practicing this very thing. Newspeak, in reality, is what today's vote is all about. We're calling this piece of legislation that we're going to loosen onto the people of this great state workers' freedom legislation. We're using that more polished term because the last newspeak word we used was right to work, and that took on and developed some negative connotations. Workers' freedom, instead of what it really is. Believe me, this is not freedom for workers. It is a busting of workers' protection. It is a busting of their real freedom in the end. Since when is creating the possibility of lower paying jobs for men and women in West Virginia workers' freedom? Since when is it workers' freedom when it's harder to make ends meet in the family's budget? I can tell you when this will be happening. When we pass this legislation, this newspeak, these untruths of this piece of legislation. We're being told that this is a way of creating jobs in West Virginia. We want jobs. We need jobs. We're willing to struggle and fight for jobs. But again, this legislation, to use the Orwellian term in 1984, is newspeak. We've heard it from the governor's office statement when he spoke to the Judiciary Committee. He said in his effort to recruit businesses to our state that this right-to-work legislation is simply not an issue that anybody ever asks, anybody ever puts on their list. It's not an issue. Let me tell you what the issues are. Education is one of those issues. If you've driven very far, roads are an issue. We don't talk about it a lot in this body. We should be talking about quality of life in this state is an issue. But right to work is not that issue. It's easy to cloud the other issues because they are real and hard to deal with. It's tough to talk about education and find reform we can agree on. It's tough to deal with roads and money that it takes to build them. But it's really simple to use newspeak and give workers the less freedom they have and the unfairness they don't need. I think we say this newspeak because we're afraid to do or say what we must do to really create jobs. And this is hard, it's creative, and it takes leadership. We in the state, and I will take blame for that, but I'm going to blame the others for that too. We have failed to be leaders because we're too busy, all of us, practicing newspeak and protecting ourselves from each other. Newspeak is easy. Words are cheap. but the truth and action on the real issue. Let me tell you, that's much harder. We talk newspeak, worker freedom, then we don't have to face working on tough education issues. We talk newspeak, and we don't have to face the truth of paying and funding roads. We talk newspeak, and we never have to admit anything about the quality of life in our communities as it continues to decline for our citizens. Newspeak is easy. Actions, that's hard. What are we saying if we pass this legislation? We're saying that all the problems of the state of West Virginia, without us taking any blame for it, all the problems in the state of West Virginia are on the backs of working men and women because it is their fault we have this issue. We're saying that we're going to pass this legislation, and this bothers me as much as anything. We're going to pass this legislation today without even a full body of members here to address this issue. Every district has 2 senators, except the 9th district here today. Every district has 2 senators to address this issue. It's unfair to the people of the 9th district, and I contend that it's unfair from the senator from Raleigh County to have to be the only one to speak for 109,000 people. I don't know how the court rules. I can't take care of that. But it's unfair that we push this through today with newspeak, what we are wanting to pay people, what we're wanting to do people, when we're not all even here to do it. Who's going to prosper when this is over? More jobs, we are told, will be created. More jobs with less pay. Now, that's a great goal for us to have as a state. More jobs with less pay. Ask the people of Mississippi how they like more jobs with less pay. Ask them how it's going for them. What are we saying today in this hurried vote? What we're saying is that the most important resource in this state, now, coal is important. Gas is important. I contend water is important. But the most important resource in this state, the most important resource, it's the people of the state. The people, we are saying, are expendable for political expediency. I want jobs, but I also want employers who have a goal, not just for the greatest profit for themselves, but also want to help build us as a great home for all of us, about making this place, West Virginia, the great place it is. As a legislative body, our jobs should not be creating newspeak, which divides us. And I believe it divides us as a people in a mighty way and as a body. Believe me, we're more divided now than we've ever been. But our job should be about rolling up our sleeves and creating real solutions for real problems. We may not agree with each other sometimes in the method, but I want to work with people from every district, from every background, in trying to solve the problems we face. I love West Virginia. When I was in seminary, I used to have a logo in my window in Kentucky when I was in seminary of the Great Seal of West Virginia, and I told people I was the embassy in this foreign land for the state of West Virginia. I love this state, and I want us to continue to fight for this state, not with newspeak, but in reality. And I promise you that if we can defeat this newspeak bill, we can get together on real issues. We can move this state forward. I started with Orwell, and I'm going to end with a quote from Orwell. The great danger of clear language is enemy of clear language is insincerity. When there is a gap between one's real and one's declared aims, one turns, as it were, instinctively to long words and exhausted idioms, like a cuttlefish squirting out ink. I'm tired of squirting out ink. I'm tired of the groups in this state squirting out ink. I'm tired of us as a body in this state, the greatest body in West Virginia legislative being here in the Senate. I'm tired of us squirting out newspeak, the ink of newspeak. Let's say the truth. Let's vote the truth. Let's defeat this newspeak legislation today, and we can do this today and start over with real changes for West Virginia, real future for West Virginia, real hope for West Virginia. I want to be part of that, and I want you to be part of that, and I want you to be part of that. And Mr. President, I want you to be part of that as we lead this state forward in real change with what we do. Please defeat this today.
Senator from Harrison.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, in my lifetime, this is probably the most serious legislative session facing some of the most serious challenges that we've ever had in West Virginia. This week, our top priorities should be roads, fixing the potholes, infrastructure, getting water and sewer for development and economic development, education, making sure our kids graduate and go on to college when they choose, a trained workforce to provide to employers when they come to West Virginia and want to set up shop here, drug addiction, which has plagued so many of our communities, putting more money in the hands of working people so they'll spend it in our local economy so all of our businesses will do well. Perhaps most important was what we should have faced last session, a worldwide energy glut that depressed energy prices that began more than 2 years ago and today has caused us a significant deficit that we have to address. Instead, we've spent our first 8 days on right to work, workplace freedom, newspeak. Propaganda is the real word for it. It's a bill that divides us. It's going to keep us from working on the real problems because we all know it isn't going to do one darn thing for West Virginia. We're chasing ghosts. We're chasing ghosts for a hidden agenda instead of facing our problems. Now, I sat through 2 days of Judiciary Committee hearings. So did my esteemed colleague from Morgan. And we have to agree that at best the benefits are murky. By the best possible estimation from the professor, we're looking at a 0.4% increase in unemployment. Excuse me, a reduction of unemployment by 0.4%. That got wiped out in the last 2 years with the downturn in the oil and gas company tenfold. Now, wasn't one company, not one company had stood up and said, you pass right to work, we're coming to West Virginia. And if my opposition had one, they would have been there to testify. They would have testified they were bringing 100 jobs to West Virginia. Every person who spoke from out of state said they could not name one company that came to their state because they passed right to work. The study that we're all relying on from the other side of the aisle didn't include Oklahoma, a state that's lost thousands of manufacturing jobs since it passed right to work, which has seen a depression of wages. Wisconsin, which is now $1.2 billion in the hole. What was undisputed was there would be a decrease in wages for working people, and that in states that had right to work, workplace deaths were 40% higher because there's a lack of safety. Now, if you want to know what workplace or freedom or right to work is going to do for West Virginia, look no further than Mississippi. They've had right to work for 50 years, and they're the only state we get to point to that we can say is below us. It did them no good, and will do West Virginia no good. What was also undisputed in the committee hearings was that no employee can be fired for not joining a union. No employee can be forced to join a union. No employee has to pay full union dues. The Beck dues, which we all learned in committee, was the portion they pay for what they get from unions, even when they're non-union employees, which was the same wages and benefits that were negotiated for the union members, and representation before their employer when there was an adverse employment action, for free under right to work. None of those fees that were paid by non-union members for their fair share of representation by the union could go towards political activities or campaigning. That's federal law. If you think the fee you pay is too much for what you get out of a union, you can challenge it. Challenge it with the Department of Labor, with the Federal Labor Board, and they do real investigations. If you think your fees are being spent wrong, you can make the same challenges. That's called due process. And what better freedom could there be when the unions are operated just as our government, as democracies? You don't like your leaders, you vote them out. And that's what our voters ought to do if we pass this bill. The goal of this bill is very simple. Financially starve the unions out of existence, end collective bargaining, have your sway over every individual employee. Because in right-to-work states, and they're mostly in the South, right-to-work states, 70% of the new hires do not join the union and do not pay union dues. People will say that's their choice. They don't understand what they get when they join a union. They don't understand that you can't negotiate with your employer if you're one man. But we're going to find out in West Virginia if this law passes. Eventually, our children and grandchildren. On the vague promise, as my friend the majority leader said, on the vague promise that somebody might come here and create a job, he wants this legislation passed. It will financially starve the only representation, the only strength of working people. Without a single promise of a job or a new business opening in this state, it will guarantee lower wages. It will decrease worker safety when those parents want to return home to their children at night. It's not another tool. It's a weapon. It's a sledgehammer against collective bargaining in our state. We've created an enforcement scheme with no fiscal note. The Department of Labor will have to have enforcement activities. The Attorney General will have enforcement activities. 55 prosecuting attorneys will have to enforce this, but there's no fiscal note attached. That's wrong. That's wrong because in Michigan alone, where right to work passed, they put $1 million into the Department of Labor to oversee this same bill. We need a fiscal note before this bill passes. This bill will get nothing done. It's divisive. And how can the majority push this through when 100,000 people plus are not represented in this chamber? They have one senator, they're missing their other senator. It is wrong to push a bill of this magnitude, of this divisive nature, through this chamber without full representation in the Senate. You know, for 20 years I've watched our legislature, and I don't just blame the majority. The Democrats have been responsible, too, for chasing ghosts, for not facing our problems. A trained workforce, flat land, raising wages for all of our workers, our state workers, our teachers, and our private sector workers. Because when you put money in the hands of working people, everybody does well. Instead, we've spent 8 days on a divisive bill that requires a full Senate, that requires a fiscal note. We owe it to every West Virginian to stop chasing ghosts, to start solving our real problems, and most of all, to do what's right every time. Thank you.
The senator from Monongalia.
Thank you, Mr. President. Ladies and gentlemen, I'll try to make this brief. I hope that my voice stays with me and that you'll bear with me. I think the folks in the gallery are deserving to hear from as many of us as possible. There's a mystery here in this chamber today, and it made me think of myself as a young teen. I often enjoyed to read the stories of Arthur Conan Doyle. I enjoyed countless hours following the adventures of Sir Sherlock Holmes. The Holmes character used observation as his key tool to unwind the mystery that surrounded him. The Holmes character was unique in the fact that he seldom spoke. And when he did, it was only often to discredit the findings of local authorities. Now, I'm not the Sherlock Holmes type, obviously, but I do quietly sit here in my seat during session and during our chamber meetings, and I observe my surroundings. From this very seat, I'm able to inject myself into conversations behind me in the reporter's aisle. I can hear conversations over here, and occasionally I can hear a conversation in the gallery above us. And what makes these conversations interesting is the body language that develops around the whole scheme. These are tells, as most poker players will tell you. We all have them, whether it would be avoiding eye contact, a high-pitched voice, the touching your face, or simply not returning a phone call These are all tales. I bring this up because I believe here today we do in fact have a mystery to solve. Here's the thing. I'm lying in bed last evening. I'm asking myself, who is it that is asking and wanting right to work in the state of West Virginia? Is it our economic development coordinators? There's 55 of them. I've yet to receive a phone call from any one of them asking me to support this issue. Is it our municipalities? Well, just this week I had dinner with both Morgantown City Council and Fairmont City Council. Did they bring this issue up? No. Is it our county commissioners? 165 county commissioners, and not one has contacted my office. And these are the men and women that I would dare say are on the front lines, who are looking for things to improve economic development in their communities. Again, not one has contacted me. And just this past week, over 2,000 men and women, some of them here in this gallery today, rolled into Charleston, filled the halls of this great capital to show their displeasure with this piece of legislation. Oddly enough, I've yet to see people in the halls to support this issue. In fact, I've not seen a person come to my office asking me to support this issue. To date, I've received just 8 emails in support of the measure. And I've actually lost count as to how many emails I received opposing the legislation. So let me bring this back around to the mystery we're trying to solve, the mystery I spoke of earlier. I look around the room, and using my powers of observation that we all have the ability to do, I know for a fact that there are 2 of you on the opposite side of the aisle that actually oppose this piece of legislation. I know it from the looks on your faces. I know it from your body language. And quite honestly, I've read your lips. And to those 2 individuals, and there may be more, that oppose this legislation and who are in their minds thinking that this may cost me my election, or for the fact that you simply believe this is a bad piece of legislation. Well, all I can say is that only you know what to do at this point in time. Only you can make that decision to vote no. So where are we? Has this mystery been solved? Have the people actually come forward, or is this some unknown entity outside the state of West Virginia trying to take control? Again, I'm not Sherlock Holmes, but I would argue and I would conclude that the only thing being resolved today is a vote trying to validate the unknown. Ladies and gentlemen, I ask you to reject this motion.
Further discussion. Senator from Fayette.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise today to speak in strong opposition to Senate Bill 1, a piece of legislation which appears to have as its only object the decline and weakening of union membership and therefore diminishing the ability of workers to organize and bargain collectively. In the past several months, in anticipation of the potential for this debate, I have sought out and read a multitude of reports and articles attempting to frame those issues related to so-called right-to-work legislation and to discern what economic benefit, if any, can be derived from the passage of any such legislation. What I found in the literature was a series of inconsistent and contradictory findings predicated largely on spinning facts in support of some preconceived notion concerning the wisdom of this legislation. For those who may laud or seek to trumpet the pressing need for the passage of this legislation through claims that it holds any potential whatsoever for attracting new business and jobs to our state and increased economic prosperity for our people, your claims are highly questionable at best and more probably incorrect. What troubles me more than engaging in a wedge issue debate, which appears to be far more political than substantive, is the valuable time that we waste that could have been better spent on real issues affecting the lives of our people. Such substantive issues as diversification of our economy, efforts to improve our lagging workforce participation rates, and properly retaining and developing the workforce and jobs for tomorrow are among those matters that are far more likely to improve our business climate in this state. As we all know, since 1935, Through the passage of the National Labor Relations Act, business and labor have benefited greatly from collective bargaining processes intended to bring stability and fundamental fairness to workplaces throughout America. Questions concerning closed shops or required worker membership in a labor union were clearly resolved through the passage of the Taft-Hartley Act in 1947, through which a worker may choose to opt out from membership in a labor union and the payment of membership dues in excess of that which is required for collective bargaining representation. For this reason, Senate Bill 1 can only be viewed as an open assault on organized labor and an effort to diminish the effectiveness of the many benefits of the collective bargaining process. Mr. President, my strong and unequivocal opposition to Senate Bill 1 has very little to do with the particulars of this legislation or its bogus claims about economic prosperity for our people. Rather, my distaste for this bill is more closely aligned with my understanding of the history of our state and its people. The history of organized labor is interwoven in the very fabric of our state and has everything to do with who we truly are. In the communities in which I live, many of our people are the proud sons and daughters, grandsons and granddaughters of West Virginia coal miners who have fought for and secured the rights to bargain collectively for workplace safety and fundamental fairness in the workplace. For those of us who understand that West Virginia is truly special, it is often said that the true strength of our state can be found in the character of our people. What is it in our people that has molded our character and make us who we truly are? In my judgment, the answer to that question can be found in the struggle for workplace safety and the sacrifices and solidarity that was required to bring fairness to the workplace. Indeed, at one time, there was thunder in the mountains as persons fought the good fight to establish and maintain the right to engage in the collective bargaining process for the benefit of the many. Senate Bill 1 is an affront to the dignity of our proud past, and it is in no way representative of the character and nature of the West Virginians that I have always known. Finally, on a personal note, I had the misfortune of losing my father at an early age and was therefore deprived of his good advice and counsel on many issues. However, as a much younger man, I clearly recall my father telling me, "Son, never cross a picket line." In response to this advice, I asked him why. His response was that everyone is entitled to their fair share of the pie. With this advice in mind, Mr. President, today I see a line which runs right down the middle of this Senate chamber today, and we all must decide as a matter of conscience and conviction whether we will cross that line. Today, I am proud to stand for working men and women across the state of West Virginia and will never do anything to encroach upon their hard-earned rights to stand in solidarity and to negotiate and bargain collectively. For these and many other reasons, I urge the defeat of Senate Bill 1.
Further discussion? The senior senator from the 15th.
Thank you, Mr. President. I promise I won't be brief. I'm sitting here listening to everything that goes on here this morning, and Mr. President, I think it's well known that I'm blue collar. I'm not a college graduate. I'm a plumber. I'm an electrician. Grew up on a farm. Certified water specialist. I went through welding training, machine training. The list goes on. I've never quit learning for that matter. Refrigeration engineer, I forgot about that. Ammonia refrigeration. It's an old trade, not a new trade. It's an old one. It's very few people are capable of doing this. I run a small business, and my employees are like family to me. My son is the treasurer, a union member, a treasurer of his local 102. My wife is a shop steward and a trustee for her union. So when it boils down to this, and we're big business and not, no. This is about looking out for the people of West Virginia. We've done things a lot the same way for a long time, Mr. President. A lot. It's time we stop doing the same thing and over and over and expecting different results. 25 states have right to work laws. Will this fix it? We don't know, but we know one thing for certain. What we've been doing hasn't worked. Our employees in this state with the right to work law have a lower per capita income than most other states in this country, and certainly the lowest of our surrounding states. Now, frankly, as a West Virginian and a blue-collar guy, I want to make sure the people in West Virginia are making more money, not less. And the only way that you're capable of doing that is to have more jobs, more businesses locating here. Is this the end all? Absolutely not. But I've heard it sit here on the floor today, and for years, we've never heard of where our business didn't come to West Virginia because we have right to work. Well, two things take place. Number one, somebody's not listening, or two, they didn't come here to ask. They went somewhere else because it's common knowledge which states are right to work and which ones are not. Terrain doesn't have a thing to do with it. We can actually do things throughout this state and be unique and make it happen and put our people to work. Now that leads me to the next issue. There's a picture out here on the internet of union bosses and political leaders holding up signs supporting the very president of this country right now that have put our coal miners out of work. And I'm telling you right now that if they had the choice of whether to pay dues or not, I predict those very people in that picture holding that sign up for the person that has destroyed our state and brought upon us the deficit that we have currently right now, they wouldn't have been there because their dues was mandated. Nonsense. Give the workers the opportunity to decide whether they want to be in the union or not. Give them that opportunity. Because if you do, the union leaders will be responsive to their employees or their members instead of the other way around. And I get to hear this quite often. I didn't think I'd stand up here and get quite this passionate about it. It's disturbing. 2 years ago, sat in this chamber, and I was in that seat over there closest to the door, and I was in the minority. And we were passing a minimum wage bill. And I had a floor amendment. And some of us remember what it was. And I'm going to remind those that didn't know who wasn't here. All it did was exempt out people that were making minimum wage or 10% above that for paying union dues. Not exempted out of being in the union. They could still be a member of the union, but they wouldn't have had to pay dues. It was voted down. It was voted down in this chamber. Now you tell me what was taking place by making people making minimum wage, paying union dues. What benefit were they getting? Nada, zero, nothing. This piece of legislation is going to do two things. It's going to give us another tool in the tool bucket of being able to get businesses to locate to West Virginia, those that have never even given us a glance. That's one. And the other one is it's going to make union leaders more responsive, just like those of us in business, that when we go to provide a service to our customers, that we do everything we can to make sure those customers are happy. And so it's a twofold win for the people of West Virginia. And when we get more jobs here, and this isn't about what happened yesterday, it's been decades that we've had problems. We're talking about tomorrow and the future. And again, if you think doing the same thing over and over is going to get you a different result, well, I don't know what to say about that, because it won't happen that way. But we are providing the leadership to West Virginia, and I want to see those wages go up $10,000 a year for every worker, and we put our people back to work, because there's not a better way of getting people off of the drugs and the public assistance and everything else than having a good paying job. Thank you, Mr. President. I appreciate the opportunity.
Further discussion. Senator from Nicholas.
Thank you, Mr. President. I appreciate the spirited debate that we've heard so far this morning, Mr. President. But the one thing that I've not heard discussed thus far is a word that I've heard as I've traveled through my district, as I've had conversations with people back home, and that's hope. Our people right now are struggling because they feel there is no hope. Our kids feel like there's no hope because there's no jobs. With the decline in our mining industry, the situation that we're having in the northern oil and gas fields, we just have to look around throughout West Virginia. Businesses are closing. Why? Because they feel there's no hope. Mr. Burdett stood before the committee earlier this week, and I will affirm that he said that he had never been presented with a question or challenged because we didn't have right to work, because quite frankly, the businesses that were coming to West Virginia to talk about bringing their business, their industry to West Virginia already knew the answer to that particular question. It's time for change. Change means that we have to leave the direction that we've been going, turn, and go a different direction. Change is hard. I will tell you, as I look around this gallery, as I look into the balcony above this gallery, change is hard. But change is necessary. Change is necessary now. Right to work is, or workplace freedom, however you want to tag it, is a very difficult subject. But when I stood, or rather sat, and asked the speaker earlier this week about change in the direction, change in the opportunities that they might experience, rather than hearing someone who was willing to change, I heard, I'm not willing to give my people hope. I'm not willing to change the message. I'm not willing to aggressively work with the future businesses and industry representatives that would come to our state and market my people. That's what I heard. And it's unfortunate. We've got tremendous suicide problems, drug abuse problems in our communities around West Virginia. The reason that we have that problem is because they feel there's no hope. I will tell you that it's time to make change so that we can bring business and industry here to West Virginia so that we can give people hope. When we start doing that, we'll see our kids coming back to West Virginia. We'll start seeing our kids willing to be educated because there's hope. And they know that there will be a job here in West Virginia for them to enjoy. Mr. President, I urge passage of the legislation.
Senator from Upshur.
Mr. President, I've heard here this morning and now this afternoon from a few people on the other side of this issue the idea that we have a lot of different problems that need to be addressed and that maybe this is not the right problem to address. We do have a lot of problems in West Virginia, our roads, our schools, really any number of things. But they've had 8 decades to address these problems, and for 8 decades the response has been to shove these problems off to one side and to ignore these problems and to propose Mickey Mouse solutions to these problems such that after 8 decades our state is last in practically everything we could possibly want to be first in. And we're first in practically everything we want to be last in. But today, they want to elevate these problems to the forefront of everyone's consciousness, and somehow we should drop everything and focus on the issues that they've ignored. I believe that we are going to address those issues. We did big things last year, and we're going to do big things this year. And those issues are going to get attention. This is one of many issues that cause problems in West Virginia. This particular issue is one of many issues that cause problems in West Virginia as far as economic growth is concerned, and as far as economic and personal liberty is concerned. It's an issue that needs to be addressed, and we're addressing this issue just as we'll address a number of other issues. It doesn't do any good, though, to demagogue the issue. That accomplishes nothing. That's what's been done, and nothing's been accomplished. It does no good today to demagogue this issue yet again, and there'll be other issues. We saw it last night in Judiciary on an entirely unrelated issue, demagoguery that had no real foundation in fact, just throwing up obstacles to solutions. The word newspeak was tossed around a little while ago, that somehow calling this bill a Workplace Freedom Act was a type of newspeak. That it's the opposite of what the word means, and I would take issue with the way that word was characterized, although 1984 does have a word for it. Doublethink is another word for it. But in this particular case, I would say that newspeak, as defined, is taking a portion of a man's wages against his will to force him to support a cause that he does not like, and then you tell him that you're representing his interests and protecting his rights. That's newspeak. That's the opposite of what you're supporting in this issue. Now, I'll address a little bit an issue that was also raised related to the question of free riders. I've got a quote here directly out of a decision that was made by the National Labor Relations Board, and it addresses that question very directly, and I'm going to read it, and it says, this is from 2010. This is not a years ago quote. This is from 2010, and it says, the board and courts have long recognized that various types of agreements and understandings between employers and unrecognized unions fall within the framework of permissible cooperation. Notably, employers and unions may enter into members-only agreements which establish terms and conditions of employment only for those employees who are members of the union. There's no such thing as a free rider issue here. The unions choose exclusive representation clauses in contracts that then force them to represent members, but it's their choice to do that. And they'll have a choice to not do that the next time the contract is up for negotiation. So there will be no change in current contracts. And future contracts, unions will have the option. This particular NLRB decision actually even quotes a Supreme Court decision that reaffirms that. It says that in the decision, the Supreme Court reasoned that such agreements could be beneficial to interstate and international cooperation, or commerce, I should say. So it's been tested at NRLB, it's been tested in the United States Supreme Court. Unions are absolutely not required under any circumstance to represent people that are not paying dues. That's the simple truth. Now, I'll tell you something else about the free rider clause. I like the comment there. People who support right to work, they're out working. The free riders are right up there.
Chamber will be in order.
What the unions have done as it relates back to Newspeak is the UAW forced members of the UAW to support Planned Parenthood, even though many of their members are Christian people who are opposed to that issue. What we saw in Wisconsin whenever they recently passed right to work was a reduction in union membership, but what does that represent? That represents people who were tired of being misrepresented by the union. So they dropped out. Now, that doesn't mean that it destroyed the union. Unions still exist in Wisconsin. And in some states, for example, Indiana, the fastest growing union membership in the country is in Indiana, which is a right-to-work state. So right-to-work does not kill unions, but what it does do is it forces unions to represent the members in a real way and not in a contrived way. I'm going to close, because of the particular party divide that we see here, by quoting someone who is the founder of the party across the aisle. And what he said was, to compel a man to furnish funds for the propagation of ideas he disbelieves and abhors is sinful and tyrannical. That's Thomas Jefferson. When unions force people to pay dues that don't want to be a member of the union so that they can then have their dues used to pay for Planned Parenthood, to pay for Ken Hall to come over and use the Beck dues, which he admitted to illegally using the other day. He used Beck dues for political purposes, not as a representation with the company. To force people to pay for ideas that they find sinful and tyrannical is something that we, as a free people, have to reject and say no. And the founder of that party is the one who said that. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator from Braxton is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. You know, back home in the country where I come from, there's a saying that some people use, that a lie well told and stuck to is better than the truth. That's what we just heard. As members of this body, shame on any one of us who disrespects the people who come down here to represent what is near and dear to their heart. And I want to apologize to every one of you for that. Now look, our friends across the aisle have said a lot of cool things here today, most of them not true. They wanted to talk about our president. Well, let's just talk about something for a minute. Our friends across the aisle always say how we're for smaller government and lowering the deficit. Every Republican president that has left the White House left us farther in debt and larger government. Every single one of them, check their record. Now look, whenever we start trying to get political gains off the backs of the people that are only guilty of one thing, trying to go to work, make a living, and do the right thing, shame on us. We've lost our real purpose of being here. Our purpose of being here is to represent everybody, to try to make everybody a better lifestyle and life. And what we're witnessing here today is the dismantling of the working class of this state and these United States, and I certainly apologize to you people for that. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator from... Ladies and gentlemen in the gallery, I appreciate this is an emotional issue. I'm going to respectfully ask that you remain seated and quiet as we deliberate. Thank you. Senator from Jackson.
Thank you, Mr. President. And let me just say what a great debate it has been, and to thank all the people for coming here and to participate in this and to listen to it. It is an important issue, and I want to stay on the issue, not presidential politics or anything else. Stay on this issue. And what we are presented with today, and what the condition in which we find our state, Mr. President, is incontrovertible. We have absolute evidence from study after study after study that demonstrates West Virginia has an economy that has not prospered. We are last. We're last. And somebody might argue with me and say, no, 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 we're next to last. Do you really want to make that argument? Do you really want to say, I didn't finish last, I finished next to last? We should be ashamed of our position from an economic prosperity perspective in West Virginia. Some of the studies that have been referenced in the debate, Forbes study ranks West Virginia, I have it, last. Last. Last in labor supply, last in regulatory environment, last in economic output rank, last in growth prospect ranks. Forbes. CNBC, you're right, we're 49th. You win that one. 49th. In opposition to those statistics, we have a study from a PhD economist at our flagship university in West Virginia. Not nobody here is a PhD economist, right? But we all have opinions on it, and I've heard all the opinions. But we have a PhD economist who says the following: passage of this bill will result in more jobs. And somebody talked about it was only a 0.4% growth rate, 0.4% improvement. 0.4% in West Virginia is a 33.5% increase over the jobs creation. In fact, it's written various commentaries, the job growth in America is only 1.4%. A 0.4% growth rate, in addition to what we're experiencing, would be over 30% increase. Is that important? Are those 30% more jobs important? So that's one piece of evidence we have that says this will help West Virginia. The second thing is that our gross domestic or state product will increase by 0.5%. That's, in West Virginia, a 0.5% increase in our gross state product. That's 10% in West Virginia. The study also says, and I'm weighing all these, I'm asking you to weigh these in a balance. You've got a PhD economist and you've got a state ranked last. So you've got two pieces of evidence that say, I've got job growth and I've got gross state product growth, or state product growth. It also says there will be no reduction in wages or benefits. It says it in the report on page 5. He found the right-to-work laws were associated with a 6.7% increase in per-worker wages relative to where they would have been without right to work. Now, PhD economist or status quo? That's the record. At the end of the day, as the chairman of the judiciary began the comments, this does not prevent anyone from joining a union. Does not prevent anyone from joining a union. Does not prevent anyone from paying union dues. Does not outlaw collective bargaining. What is the problem with this bill? You've got evidence, PhD economists, that say it will create jobs, improve income, not reduce wages, and create more state product for West Virginia, versus opinions that say might hurt, could be scary. What we're doing now is not working. It's been said over and over and over. What we are doing now does not work. We're last. And so we come to this body attempting to solve big problems. And I thank you for all your comments and the respectful attitude in which we've gone about this debate. You've been terrific. And I know nobody's going to change their minds on this today. Although I will say, I'm a little concerned that somebody could read the caucus over here better than we could. But it's important work. And because we're doing this, doesn't mean that we can't do other things. We want to roll up our sleeves and work with you in every possible area that will move West Virginia forward. But when we encounter something that's hard, we don't stop. We don't stop because it's divisive. Many times the hard things are the things that will move us in the greatest direction forward. And so I think, and by the way, nobody over here is trying to lie. I hate that word. None of us use lies to... We believe these things. We believe it because of the evidence that we have before us, the studies that we have before us. Would it be easier to come here and vote to make everyone happy or to not have any opposition? Certainly. We don't do those things. It hasn't worked. We need to do the things that will move our state forward. And I know you want to help us do that. And if you don't believe that we need to change, then continue on the status quo. But, we've heard a lot of quotes. George Orwell, others. And not great at quotes or anything like that, but I'll paraphrase. Because we're here tonight or this afternoon to do this thing that is hard, that will move our state forward. And it should be said of us by those who come after us that in our day, in our time in this chamber, we did all that could be done. We did all that we could to restore prosperity for West Virginia, to move our state forward, to create jobs. We took the hard vote. We kept the faith. We did the right thing. And I would ask you to consider supporting the studies and the empirical evidence that demonstrate this will help West Virginia. Because like my colleague, I want all of us to prosper. I want all of us to have more work, to more jobs, more opportunity, and more income. It was mentioned that there are those who have a history of a labor movement. I have that same history. And it's been impugned often through comments, and we all get all that Facebook stuff and all that junk. I'm a product of a union environment. My father was a union member, a leader of the labor movement. I was a member of a labor union at one time. But what I will say is that this does not impugn or deviate from the principles and the tenets of union leadership, union membership, union dues paying. It is an opportunity to decide the freedom for which you want to pursue within the workplace. I support unions. You may not believe it, you may laugh. I do. It's a product of my heritage. I want to be stronger and each one to have more income, more opportunities. And for those reasons, I would ask you to support this bill and move West Virginia forward. Thank you, Mr. President.
Recognize the senator from Morgan to close.
Thank you, Mr. President. Distinguished members of this Senate, I have listened to the compelling arguments that have been made on all sides of this question. I have to say I'm impressed, as I always am, with what this body does and with the seriousness with which important questions are tackled and debated in this chamber. There were some arguments made in opposition to the bill that I would need to address, respond to. Actually, there were some things that were said by people who oppose this bill that I agree with fundamentally, not opposition to the bill, but points made on the during the earlier part of this debate. Let me first back up and say, though, that as I was hearing the debate, I checked back through my notes deeply, read them as closely as I could, and looked for the words silver bullet or magic bullet, and I didn't see it written anywhere in my notes. I don't think I said it. I don't think I said it. And let me just say to my good friend, the distinguished minority leader from Marshall County, I don't think this bill is a silver bullet. I agree with him on that. I don't think this is something that wipes away or cures all the problems and challenges faced by this state. But I do think it will have a positive effect. I think it will help. Let me, first of all, talk about the legal question that was raised by the distinguished minority leader, this issue of labor organizations having to represent people who are not members or who do not pay dues. The gentleman from Upshur is correct on that. The case, there's actually a U.S. Supreme Court case. The case is Retail Clerks International Association, local union numbers 128 and 633 petitioners versus Lion Dry Goods. And the case goes all the way back to 1962. It's a decision from 1962 from the United States Supreme Court. For those who would care, it's at 82 Supreme Court Reporter 541. The decision was penned by Justice Brennan, and he concluded his opinion in that decision by saying members-only contracts have long been recognized, and there are citations there. And so I think that disposes of that question. No labor union can be compelled to represent people who choose not to be members. I want to go back to our bill, to the text of the bill itself. You know, we tend to focus on the new article in the bill, but as I mentioned at the outset in discussing the legislation, the bill amends and reenacts a couple sections that are already in West Virginia Code. So I want to read you, if I may, the first part of the first section of this bill that is amended and reenacted if it passes. Employees shall have the right to self-organization, to form, join, or assist labor organizations, to bargain collectively through representatives of their own choosing, and to engage in other concerted activities for the purpose of collective bargaining. And it goes on from there. That's not only our current law, but it will be part of what, if this bill passes, we reenact today. And I couldn't help during the course of our discussions being moved at more than one time, but in particular, as I'm thinking of right now, the remarks from the distinguished gentleman from Fayette County talking about the history of the labor movement in this state. And I think the thunder on the mountain, I think it was the gentleman from Fayette that mentioned the thunder on the mountain. And he's right. He's right. West Virginians, these free-spirited, independent mountaineers who settled across these Alleghanies, fought hard and desperately over a long period of time for the right to organize. We must preserve that. This bill does preserve that. And what this bill does not preserve was not part of that struggle, something that came later perhaps. The bill does not preserve the right to compel people who don't want to be a member, who don't want to be a participant, who don't want to pay dues, to be a member or be a participant or pay dues. Just as it is inconsistent with the spirit of freedom that we all hold dear for West Virginians to prevent citizens from organizing or joining a union, so too is it inconsistent with the spirit of freedom to compel people to do it against their will. This bill addresses that. Now, the distinguished minority leader mentioned other measures. I wrote them down. I might not have got them all, but I was able to write as he spoke: workforce training, education, expansion of broadband infrastructure. I agree with him 100%. I agree with him 100%. Those are measures we must work on. And for my part, and I think all of us, I stand ready. I stand ready. Roads were mentioned by, I think it was the distinguished senator from Greenbrier County and the senator from Harrison County. Our highway infrastructure needs attention, our attention. I agree, absolutely. We should work on all those things, Mr. President, and I'm sure under your leadership we will. They are not mutually exclusive to the question before us today. I take at their words the remarks of all the members here who've said they oppose this measure because they don't believe it will help. I take you at your words, and I ask that you take us at ours, that we believe it will. Now, on that point, I will say I agree with the gentleman from Logan County. There is no certainty about any of this. The gentleman from Logan mentioned it. I think that was also mentioned by the gentleman from Fayette, that it's not absolutely clear what will happen, but I would submit to the members of this body that's true with every measure we consider, undertake, and pass here. None of us has a crystal ball to know for sure exactly what's going to happen. But what do? We try to make reasoned, informed judgments. The leadership of this body and the House of Delegates asked our flagship university to look at the question, examine the question, tell us what would be the consequence or effect of the adoption of a right-to-work bill in West Virginia. We have the result of that examination, that report. Are we to ignore it and pass on opportunities to change what we all must agree is an unacceptable status quo? The lot that has been cast now for the citizens of this state. I look around this chamber and I see people of extraordinary goodwill and commitment and devotion to the people of West Virginia. And when I look around this room, and I'm not talking about either side of the aisle in this chamber, I'm talking about the whole room. What I see hoisted upon the shoulders of each of you, strapped hard upon your backs, are the hopes and aspirations and dreams of West Virginia, its people, its future. As the gentleman from Nicholas said, change is hard. It's hard. It is hard to disrupt the status quo, always. Mr. President, on this point, I'm grateful, for one, for your leadership. You know, since you ascended that chair, you have had a laser-like and singular focus on what can we do to improve the economic climate in West Virginia, to enhance the opportunities of our citizens for prosperity. And we must have the courage to answer the call. It's not a magic bullet or a silver bullet, but I believe it is part of multiple measures that can enhance our chances and move West Virginia in the right direction for all of the people we represent. Mr. President, I close. I urge passage of the bill.
Question for the Senate is, shall the bill pass? All those in favor will vote yea. Those opposed will vote nay. The clerk will prepare the machine. Has every member voted? If so, the clerk close the machine, ascertain the results. On this question, 17 yeas, 16 nays, 0 absent, not voting. More than a majority of those present and voting having voted in the affirmative, I declare the bill passed. The clerk will communicate the action of the Senate to the House. Bills on second reading.
Senate Bill 253, exempting drug treatment and drug recovery facilities from county and municipal ordinances.
Senate will be at ease for a moment.
You're tuned to coverage of the West Virginia Legislature on the West Virginia Channel. A reminder that we will bring you today's House floor session as soon as today's Senate floor session has concluded. And the vote for Senate Bill 1, write down party lines, 17 to 16.
Unanimous consent that the bill lie over one day, retaining its place on the calendar.
Is there objection? Chair hears none. The bill lie over one day, retaining its place on the calendar. Bills on first reading. The senator from Jackson.
Mr. President, I request unanimous consent that the bills on first reading be considered as having been read a first time and advanced to second reading.
Senator from Jackson requests unanimous consent that all bills on first reading be considered as having been read a first time and advanced to second reading. Is there objection? Chair hears none, so ordered. Introduction of guests. Remarks by members. The senator from Cabell.
Thank you, Mr. President. I request unanimous consent that the remarks by the senators from Morgan, Marshall, Jefferson, Logan, Greenbrier, Harrison, Mon, Fayette, Berkeley, Nicholas, Upshur, Braxton, and Jackson County be printed in the appendix to the Journal.
The senator from Cabell requests unanimous consent that the remarks by the stay with me here. The remarks by the senators from Morgan, Marshall, Jefferson, Logan, Greenbrier, Harrison, Monongalia, Fayette, senior senator from the 15th, Nicholas, Upshur, Braxton, and Jackson be published in the appendix of the Journal. Is there objection? Chair hears none, so ordered. Further remarks by members. Miscellaneous business. The senator from Jackson.
Thank you, Mr. President. Subject to announcements, I move the Senate stand adjourned until tomorrow at 10 a.m.
Are there announcements?
And I do have an announcement.
Senator from Jackson.
Just briefly, just wanted to let everyone know that we intend to come in at 10 a.m. tomorrow so that we can get our work completed. Really, there's nothing that we anticipate taking a vote on tomorrow, but just wanted to make everyone aware of that. Also, that will back up the time for your submission on the blue list by an hour as well. So just be cognizant of that and travel safely.
Senior Senator from the 4th.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Finance Committee will meet this afternoon at 3 p.m. for a budget hearing with, I think, the auditor, 3 p.m. in the finance room.
Senator from Preston.
Thank you, Mr. President. Your Committee on Education will meet today at 2 p.m. at 451M. Also, 5 o'clock this evening, 451M, Legislative Oversight Commission on Education Accountability. That's LOCIA tonight at 5 p.m., 451M.
Senator from Morgan.
Thank you, Mr. President. Your Committee on the Judiciary will meet today at 3 o'clock p.m. in the Senate Judiciary Committee room in the West Wing, and your Committee on the Judiciary will not meet tomorrow.
The Senator from Nicholas.
Thank you, Mr. President. Your Committee on Energy, Industry, and Mining was originally scheduled to meet today at 1 o'clock. We're past that hour. We are going to move that agenda to Tuesday, so we will cancel the meeting for today at 1 o'clock.
The Senator from Ohio.
Thank you, Mr. President. Likewise, your Committee on Health and Human Resources that was scheduled for today at 1 p.m. will be canceled. We will take up that agenda on Tuesday of next week. So health is canceled for this afternoon. Thank you.
Senior Senator from the 15th.
Thank you, Mr. President. Your Committee on Government and Organization will meet today at 2 p.m.
Further announcements. The Senator from Brooke.
Thank you, Mr. President. The West Virginia AFL-CIO will have a caucus in room 330 immediately following this floor session, and lunch will be provided.
Further announcements. Not the question for the Senate. The Senate stand adjourned until tomorrow at 10 a.m. All those in favor will say aye. Those opposed say no. The ayes have it. I declare the Senate adjourned.
You've been tuned to coverage of the West Virginia Legislature. You've been tuned to coverage of the West Virginia Legislature on the West Virginia channel. We will be bringing you today's House floor session in just a moment. Look for some discussion on the House floor about the prevailing wage bill that was passed by the House Government Organization Committee yesterday. Up for passage in the House today, House Bill 2101, which eliminates obsolete government entities. The bill eliminates the West Virginia Council on Aging and the Patient Injury Compensation Plan Study Board because they are unnecessary, inactive, or redundant. On second reading, House Bill 4002 to establish a 5-year sunset provision for legislative rules promulgated after April 1st, 2016.
House will be in order. All those not having privileges to the floor will please vacate the chamber. Members and guests will please rise as we are led in prayer today by the lady from the 43rd District, Delegate Campbell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If all the members in the chamber and those in the gallery would please join me in prayer. Guide me, O Lord. You are my heart. You are my strength. You are my hope. Teach me, O Lord, and guide me thy way in everything. I love you more each passing day. Thank you for your guidance. In Jesus' name I pray. If all the members would please join me in the Lord's Prayer. Our Father, who art in heaven,
hallowed be thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is.
give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, power, and glory forever. Amen.
Members and guests will please remain standing as we're led in the Pledge of Allegiance by the gentleman from the 43rd, Delegate Hartman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will everybody join me with the pledge to the flag? I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Reading of the Journal.
Journal of the House of Delegates, Charleston, Wednesday, January 20th, 2016.
Gentleman from the 43rd, Delegate Hartman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I ask unanimous consent that further reading of the journal be dispensed with and it be approved as having been read.
The gentleman from 43rd asks unanimous consent that further reading of the journal be dispensed with and it be approved as having been read. Is there objection?
Chair hears none. Journal will be approved as having been read. Gentleman from the 58th.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ladies and gentlemen, today we have a citation presentation honoring Big Brothers, Big Sisters. To accept the citation, we have friends and officials from Big Brothers, Big Sisters, and they're escorted to the well of the chamber by delegates from Putnam, Kanawha, Jackson, and Raleigh counties.
Clerk, please read a citation.
Whereas Big Brothers, Big Sisters of South Central West Virginia has a long-standing tradition of providing professionally supported one-to-one mentoring programs in West Virginia to provide youth with a dependable, caring adult to provide guidance, support, and encouragement to facilitate the social, emotional, and cognitive development of a young person. And whereas continued research on mentoring shows that formal, quality mentoring focused on developing the competence and character of the mentee promotes positive outcomes such as improved academic achievement, self-esteem, social skills, and workforce development. And whereas further research on mentoring provides strong evidence that mentoring successfully reduces substance abuse and abuse, academic failure, truancy, and delinquency. And whereas mentoring, in addition to preparing young people for school, work, and life, is extremely rewarding for the people who serve as mentors. And whereas in West Virginia, there is a growing need for effective mentoring relationships for youth due to the growing demographic shift throughout the state. And whereas, in spite of the progress made in increasing mentoring, West Virginia continues to have a growing need for mentors. And whereas Big Brothers, Big Sisters of South Central West Virginia is committed to innovative collaborations with public and private sectors and to bring state and local leaders together to support mentoring programs by preventing duplication of efforts, offering training in industry best practices, and making the most of limited resources to benefit young people in West Virginia. And whereas the designation of January 2016 as National Mentoring Month will help call attention to the critical role mentors play in helping young people realize their potential. And whereas a month-long celebration of mentoring will encourage more individuals and organizations, including schools, businesses, nonprofit organizations, faith institutions, and foundations to become engaged in mentoring in West Virginia. And whereas Mentoring Day at the West Virginia Legislature on January 21st, 2016 is designed to help build awareness of mentoring and encourage more people to become mentors and help close the mentoring gap in the state. Therefore, the House of Delegates of the West Virginia Legislature hereby designates the month of January 2016 as National Mentoring Month and January 20th as West Virginia Mentoring Day to recognize with gratitude the contributions of the thousands of caring adults and students who are already volunteering as mentors, and encourages more adults and students to volunteer as Big Brothers or Big Sisters, and directs this citation be presented.
Members will please be at ease a moment while I present the citation. Introduction of guests. The gentleman from 32nd, Delegate Fast.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to recognize in the North Gallery my friends A.G. and his sister Holly, if the House would make them welcome.
Gentleman from the 14th, Delegate Butler.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Participating in the PAGE program, and in fact, when I call their names, if they will stand and wave, we have Rachel Ellis and her mom Stephanie, and Keenan Janiker and his mom Amber, both from Ashton Elementary, and Aaliyah Gerwig with her mom and dad Carmen and Alan, and they're from Point Pleasant Junior High School. Would the House please welcome them? Thank you.
Gentleman from the 22nd, Delegate Eldridge.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On behalf of Moffitt and May, in the South Gallery, we have Larry Bays. If he'd please stand and the floor would make him feel welcome.
Gentleman from the 29th, Delegate Moy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On behalf of Delegate Bates and me, we have the privilege of having Madison Belcher paging with us today. She is from Hollywood Elementary. She is accompanied today by her parents, Heather and Jason Belcher, and her grandmother, Debbie Shaw. Would the House please make them welcome?
The lady from the 50th, Delegate Longstreth.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today we have some guests from Marion County. On behalf of myself and Delegate Caputo and Delegate Manchin, I would like to introduce them. They're in the South Gallery. First, I would like to introduce from the AARP is Gary Wick, a volunteer, originally from Reesville, I do believe, and he's moved outside of Reesville, but welcome, please welcome him. I have some guests from Pierpont College, and they're in the South Gallery. If you would stand as I introduce you, it's Dale Bradley. He's our interim president of Pierpont College. Steve Leach, he's our vice president of organization and development. And Jim Griffin, he's the chairman of the Board of Governors. Thank you for coming.
Gentleman from 48, Delegate Miley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On behalf of all of the delegates from Harrison County, we have a few folks from home. On behalf of the AARP, we have Bill and Rita Hammond in the South Gallery. If they would rise and have the House make them feel welcome. And we have Bob and Nellie Osborne from Shinston. If they would rise and allow the House to make them feel welcome. Thank you for coming.
Gentleman from the 42nd, Delegate Canterbury.
Speaker, on behalf of Delegate Ambler and myself, in this North Gallery, we have a volunteer with the AARP, Mr. Danny Gray. Would the House make him welcome?
Further introductions. Reports of standing committees.
Committee on Veterans Affairs and Homeland Security has had under consideration House Bill 4080, Department of Veterans Assistance, rule relating to VA headstones or markers, reports the same back with recommendation that it do pass, that it be referred to Committee on Judiciary.
Report be received and the bill be referred to the Committee on the Judiciary.
Committee on Government Organization has had under consideration House Bill 4046, Department of Administration, rule relating to the Purchasing Division, and House Bill 4106, State Board of Registration for Professional Engineers, rule relating to the examination, licensure, and practice of professional engineers, reports the same back with recommendation that it do pass and that it be referred to Committee on Judiciary.
Report be received and bills be referred to the Committee on Judiciary.
Committee on Pensions and Retirement has had under consideration House Bill 4048, Consolidated Public Retirement Board, legislative rule relating to service credit for accrued and unused sick leave, House Bill 4090, rule relating to the Deputy Sheriff Retirement System, House Bill 4091, rule relating to benefit determination and appeal, and House Bill 4095, rule relating to the West Virginia State Police. Reports the same back with recommendation that it do pass and that it be referred to Committee on Judiciary.
Report be received and the bills be referred to the Committee on the Judiciary.
Committee on Government Organization has had under consideration House Bill 4005, repealing prevailing hourly rate of wages requirements. Reports the same back with recommendation that it do pass.
Report be received.
Committee on Judiciary has had under consideration House Bill 2111, providing a special method for valuation of certain wireless technology property for property taxes. Reports the same back with amendment with the recommendation that it do pass as amended, that it be referred to Committee on Finance.
Report be received and the bill be referred to the Committee on Finance.
Committee on Judiciary has had under consideration House Bill 2130, including law enforcement officers among those professionals the assault or battery of which leads to enhanced criminal penalties. Reports back a committee substitute, therefore, with recommendation that the committee substitute do pass.
Report be received. Reports of select committees. Messages from the executive. Messages from the Senate.
Clerk of the Senate announces the passage by the Senate of committee substitute for Senate Bill 263, allowing travel and other expense reimbursement for members of Municipal Home Rule Board.
Report be received and the bill be referred to the Committee on Political Subdivisions and then to Finance. Resolutions.
House Concurrent Resolution 10 by Delegate P. White, Phillips, Markham, and Eldridge, Marine Corps Gunnery Sergeant Lionel Collins, Memorial Road.
Gentleman from the 58th.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I ask unanimous consent that further reading of resolutions introduced be dispensed with, and that each resolution be formally introduced and referred to the appropriate committee as listed on the chamber automation system.
The gentleman from 58th asks unanimous consent that further reading of resolutions be dispensed with, that each resolution be considered formally introduced and referred to the appropriate committee as indicated on the chamber automation system. Is there objection? Chair hears none. Each resolution will be formally introduced and so referred. Petitions. Motions.
Delegate Spinago moves that pursuant to House Rule 95A, that consideration of House Bill 4005 by this House be deferred until such time as a fiscal note can be prepared to reflect the increase or decrease in revenue of the state or its political subdivision as is required by House Rule 95A. Further, Mr. Speaker, I ask to speak to my motion.
House Bill 4005 is the prevailing wage bill. It recently was passed by the House Government Organization Committee. I believe it's been referred on second reference to the House Finance Committee. Delegate Spinagle has made a motion that he would like a fiscal note attached to the prevailing wage bill, and this is what the Speaker and his advisors, along with the House Clerk, are discussing now. We'll see what they come up with. You are tuned to coverage of the West Virginia Legislature on the West Virginia Channel. This is a recording of the House that was in its floor session while the Senate was in session. We're showing you what the House did while the Senate was in session. Delegate Spinago would like to speak to his motion. We'll see if the House Speaker lets him do that, depending on his decision as to the appropriateness of Delegate Spinagle's motion. A fiscal note is something that is attached to a bill that is an analysis of how much this particular piece of legislation will cost the state if it is enacted. That's what fiscal notes normally do. Delegate Spinagle had asked for a fiscal note to be attached to the bill while it was in the Government Organization Committee. He was turned down there. He's brought his motion directly to the floor since the Government Organization Committee reported House Bill 4005 to the floor today.
Looked at it for a while, but I haven't had any nosebleeds or headaches or blackouts. I'm doing okay. What?
While they are paused here, we will tell you that the West Virginia Senate will convene tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. instead of the usual 11 a.m. And we do know that the House has announced that it will meet at 9 a.m. tomorrow. This is because of this impending storm that's coming along. They want to make sure that lawmakers can get home safely, so they've moved up their floor sessions so that lawmakers can get out of Charleston and to their homes. So the House will convene at 9 a.m. tomorrow morning. The Senate will convene at 10 a.m. And though they will be brief floor sessions, we will provide them live here on the West Virginia channel.
Yeah. Well, last year we had it on the first day, remember? This is about something. We had a terrible first day. On the very first day, they objected to something about the red.
Once it gets back into session, the House will consider House Bill 2101, which eliminates obsolete government entities, 2 of them. The House will also consider on second reading House Bill 4002 to establish a 5-year sunset provision for legislative rules promulgated after April 1st, 2016. Look for some debate on the floor about House Bill 4002. The concern here is about rules that state agencies write when legislation is passed and signed into law, and so the state agencies write the rules to implement the new law. The Republican leadership thinks there are too many rules and that they are never revisited on a regular basis, and would like to put a limit on these rules so that they would expire, as it were, after 5 years, unless they were amended or rewritten or deemed obsolete in some manner. So this goes to rules, the rules and regulations that state agency writes in order to implement legislation. And the House will be talking about that on the floor this afternoon. We wait again for the Speaker to decide Delegate Isaac Spinagle's motion that a fiscal note be attached to House Bill 4005, the prevailing wage bill.
Chris, you can zoom in. Yeah. Look at here. Look here, Sammy. You can zoom in on it. It's more than that, isn't it? I think it's more than that. I think it's closer to 20. And the quality is really pretty good. Yeah.
Do not adjust your set. There is no sound coming from the House right now, as Delegate Tim Armstead has turned off his microphone so that he can consult with his advisors over the request to put a fiscal note on House Bill 4005, the prevailing wage bill. And you are tuned to coverage of the West Virginia Legislature on the West Virginia Channel. I'm Beth Voorhees. This is a recording of the House of Delegates floor session from earlier today.
Who does? Yeah. Yeah, it's live. I'll wave my hand and you time it. Are you ready? Three, 1004, 1005, 1006, 1007, 1008, 1009, 1010, 1011, 1012, 1013, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27. It's almost 30 seconds. Haven't done it yet? Okay. So it's more than 30 seconds. 40 seconds. Yeah, yeah. It's got to go through all kind of processing, you know what I mean?
House will be in order. To the gentleman, the motion that has been filed with the clerk is a motion pursuant to House Rule 95A relating to consideration of the bill and the fiscal note rule. Rule 95A relates to fiscal notes. As I read the rule, first of all, I believe that the motion is untimely in that the rule requires a request for a fiscal note to be made before the bill is considered by committee or on the House floor. This bill has already made its way through the committee and brought to the House floor today as a committee report. In addition to which, the rule in and of itself, 95A, states that any bill which either increases or decreases the revenue or fiscal liability of the state or any county, municipality, or other subdivision of the state, or in any manner changes or modifies any existing tax or rate of taxation. There's certainly a debate that will likely take place on the House floor as to the economic impact of this legislation. At the same time, the bill in and of itself and the language of the bill does not increase a tax. It does not specifically and expressly change revenue sources coming in to a state or county. It may have the impact of doing that, and that will certainly be, I'm sure, a subject to debate on the House floor. But the bill itself does not have a tax increase, a tax decrease, or any type of fee increase or decrease that would specifically require that it be sent to an agency for a fiscal note. So for those reasons, it's the ruling of the chair that the gentleman's motion is out of order. Further motions. Bill's introduced.
House Bill 4190 by Delegate R. Phillips, Reynolds, and others, prohibiting state agencies and departments from acting outside their statutory scopes of authority.
Gentleman from the 58th.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I ask unanimous consent that further reading of bills introduced be dispensed with and that each bill be formally introduced and referred to the appropriate committee as listed on the chamber automation system.
The gentleman from 58th asks unanimous consent that further reading of bills introduced be dispensed with, that each bill be considered formally introduced and referred to the appropriate committee as indicated on the chamber automation system. Is there objection? Chair hears none. Each bill will be formally introduced and so referred. Unfinished business. Bills on third reading.
Committee substitute for House Bill 2101, eliminating obsolete government entities.
Chair recognizes the gentleman from the 56th, Delegate Howe, to explain the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The committee substitute repeals two entities that were not repealed in SB 255 last year. The agencies that this bill repeals are the West Virginia Council on Aging and the Patient Injury Compensation Plan Study Board. Neither board has members appointed, nor have they met in years. I urge passage.
Are there other members desiring to speak to the passage of the bill? Not the question before the House is the passage of the bill. Those in favor will vote aye. Those opposed will vote no. The clerk will prepare the machine. Has each member voted? If so, the clerk will close the machine and ascertain the result. On that question, 96 ayes, 0 nays, 4 members absent not voting. A majority of members present having voted in the affirmative, I declare the bill passed. Clerk, please report the title.
Committee substitute for House Bill 2101.
Are there amendments to the title? Not title is read by the clerk will be and remain the title of the bill. Clerk, please communicate the action of the House to the Senate and request concurrence therein. Bills on second reading.
Committee substitute for House Bill 4002 relating to rulemaking under the State Administrative Procedures Act.
Are there amendments?
Delegates Fleischauer and Hanshaw move to amend the bill. On page 2, section 19, line 25.
Lady from the 51st asks unanimous consent to explain the amendment in lieu of having it read. Is there objection? Chair hears none. Lady from the 51st.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. What this rule does, and I want to thank the chairman and the Council for Judiciary and the delegate from Clay for working with me, is to add a notice procedure. The main statute would automatically sunset regulations unless the legislature acted. And this rule would say that the Secretary of State shall provide notice that the rule will sunset to each agency the year prior to the sunset date, and the notice shall direct the agency to provide information as to whether the rule's needed, whether federal funding will be impacted by its expiration, any adverse effect that will result for expiration of the rule to the agency, and whether health or safety of the residents of the state or any regulated persons will be impacted by the rule. The purpose of this is to make sure that there isn't a rule that we need to be eligible for federal funding, or that we need to make sure that our water quality is safe, that would expire without us realizing it. So it's just another process to make sure that if the statute passes, that the procedure will be more open, because it'll be on the Secretary of State's website, and that we attempting to catch any possible rules that we really need in order to get federal money, or that we need for authorization to implement federal laws. That's the purpose of the regulation, and I hope you'll consider voting in favor of it. Purpose of the motion to amend.
The further members desiring to speak to the motion. Gentleman from the 27th, Delegate Shaw.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ladies and gentlemen, the Judiciary Committee and its staff worked diligently on this bill. This particular amendment does not undermine the purpose of the bill or conflict with the provisions of the bill, and in fact it improves the bill. And for that reason, I urge its adoption and commend the gentlelady from the 51st and the gentleman from the 42nd for proposing it.
Further members desiring to speak to the amendment. If not, the question before the House is the adoption of the amendment. All those in favor will say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. Ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. Declare the amendment adopted. Are there further amendments?
Delegate Fleischauer moves to amend the bill on page 2, section 19, line 25, following the period by inserting a new subsection E.
Lady from the 51st asks unanimous consent to explain the amendment in lieu of having it read. Is there objection? Chair hears none. Lady 51st may proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This rule would change the law in a little bit of a different way. It would say that failure of the legislature to pass legislation that either reauthorizes or disapproves a rule by the date of its sunset, the rule is deemed reauthorized for another 5-year period. So this would flip the presumption, and it would require the legislature to act. And it gives some options and some timing on that. The reason I'd like to go back to explain a little bit about rulemaking. It really is kind of an obscure knowledge. There are only like 5 or 6 or 7 of us from each house that's on the Rulemaking Review Committee. Just give a little bit of history. In 1982, because of Supreme Court rulings that said the legislature has to act as a whole body on a rule, we became the only state in the country where a law is passed, the agency issues a regulation, and we vote on it again. And that is a very big, good protection for our state, because we're not here 10 months of the year. And agencies have maybe a tendency to think they're running the show, but this allows us, the elected people, to say we are running the show. So that's the history. It may be that we're overregulated because we have this, that people say we're overregulated because we have this process, but it is a good process, and it has been working for over 30 years. So why do we have rules and regulations? There is a lot of talk about we have too many rules, we have too many regulations. Most of our regulations, well, all of them, are a result of law. There's not a single regulation that isn't mandated by law, that we pass the law and then we pass the regulation. But a lot of them have to do with mine safety. We have tried and tried to make our mines safer over the years, and maybe we've been successful because the numbers have dropped. We passed laws and regulations after Sago, after Upper Big Branch. We're still trying. We also have laws that allow us to implement federal law. Tax laws are a pretty good example, and environmental laws that we, if in order to have primacy for environmental regulations, we have to do certain things to get that authority from the federal government. And you know, in addition to mine safety, we have a lot of health and safety issues. Like right now, Flint, Michigan is having some really horrible problems. Presumably, the people that are responsible are going to be held responsible because there were laws and regulations requiring that water be safe. In 1967, we passed a regulation that had to do with odor. And you might think that that's not a very important regulation, but that is how the DEP went and began to investigate the water over at Freedom. People in that area smelled licorice. There was a regulation about odor, and the DEP looked into it, and they found that several regulations were being violated with respect to water quality. We have a system in our country of capitalism that is a good system. I believe in the capitalism system. I believe that profit is, generally speaking, a good motivator. But profiteering, cutting corners, like Freedom did, and like maybe we'll find out what happened, like Upper Big Branch, they cut corners. They didn't allow, they notified people when inspectors were coming. They hung up the dust samples. There were a lot of things going wrong there that had to do with regulations. And some industries attempt to change our regulations when we're not paying very much attention. And I worry that that could happen as a result of passage of this law. I think that the amendment that I'm proposing, it does what the original rule is intended to do, is to make sure we look at regulations carefully. I commend the whoever it was that was responsible for asking state agencies to identify regulations that were obsolete. I think that DEP identified 27 regulations that were obsolete. That's a good exercise. We shouldn't have regulations on the books that are silly, like a smudge on something could be cause for an issuance of violation. But we do really need a lot of the regulations, and I worry that unless we flip that presumption that we make the legislature act after 5 years, a rule slip through the crack that could be very important. Also, there are some constitutional issues. If a lot of you have heard about separation of powers, the 3 branches of government. If we don't act, it could be deemed by our court to be a violation of the separation of powers. I think this is good public policy. I think it's consistent with the purpose of the rule, and I urge you to join me in supporting this amendment to House Bill 4002. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman from the 29th, Elliott Moy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would the lady yield for a question?
The lady yield? Lady yields.
Thank you. As I understand your explanation, this would allow, if we allow rules to automatically expire, would that not have the same effect as nullifying a law that we have voted on?
That's one of my concerns, is that every regulation is based on an underlying law. And I think that is a concern, that if we don't have a regulation in place, that it could nullify the law that we passed. Yes, I'm very concerned about that.
Without us having to vote to do that?
Yes, that is a concern of mine. Thank you for that question.
Gentleman from the 27th, Doug Schott.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I urge rejection of this motion. As I indicated, the Judiciary Committee and its staff worked extensively on this bill, and this motion to amend essentially neuters the entire purpose of the bill that we'll be working on tomorrow, and essentially takes us back to the existing law. So we've gone full circle, if this amendment is adopted, to what's already in the law under Section 15 of the appropriate section of the code. The delegate from the 51st indicates in support of this that this process for 30 years has been working effectively. And I would respectfully challenge that there's no evidence to support that in a state that leads the nation and being the only state in the union that's lost population, that has the lowest workforce population, participation rate in the nation. I think a lot of what we do here is broken, and this bill is intended to try to fix that. To try to put this into some kind of context, there are about 215 agencies that have rulemaking authority in this state that propose rules that go through a part-time legislative committee called the Rules Making Committee. And they're tasked with trying to determine whether those rules, as they come before them, justify the changes that are brought before them. Of those, there's approximately 80 to 100 rules that this committee has to review each year. They meet much more frequently than those of us in interim meetings. It's a very time-consuming, difficult job that they have. And what this motion, this amendment basically does is put the responsibility upon them if an agency, which for instance depends on a rule for funding, neglects or overlooks the sunset provision. Instead, I suggest to you that it's much more reasonable to vest the responsibility in the agency that's staffed with full-time people who are expert in this area. And keep in mind, we're talking about a part-time committee that has responsibility for reviewing rules from 215 agencies, and this amendment wants to vest that responsibility in that committee as opposed to an agency that may only have 4 or 5 rules to keep track of. So keep in mind, this is, I think this is critical. Of the 70 or 80 rules that are proposed each year, not all of those are new rules. And what this bill will do, and I don't think that's been explained, so let me just explain that to you. This bill will basically say if a new rule comes through, it has to have a sunset date attached to it. In other words, it has to have an expiration date. Now, that does not mean that the rule automatically expires. It just means if nothing is done, if the agency that had proposed this rule doesn't care enough to follow the 5-year, to track the 5-year period and lets it expire, then the rule will expire. Now, that could cause some problems, but keep in mind also that the provision of the code that governs this has an emergency rulemaking process that allows agencies to actually propose emergency rules in those cases where an emergency arises. So I suggest to you that in the worst case scenario suggested by the delegate to support this amendment, there's a provision to take care of that. And more importantly, don't we expect the agencies to track a handful of rules that could have substantial consequences on their ability to fund themselves or on the ability for them to protect the public? I mean, isn't that why they're there? As opposed to a part-time legislative group that has more than they can handle now and only one staff person to follow 215 agencies and their rules. So I suggest to you that this basically turns on its head what we're trying to do with this bill, which is, one, manage this morass of rules that have been put on the books over time, probably about 1,800 now. Some of them may be 2 or 3 pages, some of them inches thick, that we've accumulated because we've never had a process that provided for a mechanism to review these rules and determine are they still accomplishing the purpose for which they were intended? And number 2, is the cost worth what the purpose that's being accomplished? This bill basically shifts the responsibility to oversee what it should be the responsibility of the agency, which is not a very heavy task for each individual agency, but is a heavy task if it's vested in one committee. one committee to follow all 215 agencies. So I recommend that we reject this amendment and move on to the consideration of the bill as it's been presented. Thank you.
Gentleman from the 13th, Delegate Cato.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to correct the lady from 51st about Freedom Industries. That was a terrible thing that happened. But the DEP had the authority to do groundwater samples. They neglected to do their job. There were no groundwater samples for 10 years. I stressed that last year, and I'm saying it again. They had the authority to stop that, and they did not do their job. Thank you.
Gentleman from the 33rd, Delegate Hanshaw.
Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen, let's not lose sight of what the purpose of the bill is or what the purpose of the amendment is, and do so by talking about specific companies and specific acts. There is not one rule in the state of West Virginia, not one, that doesn't merit periodic review by the expert agencies charged by this body with their promulgation. Not one. The bill as it was intended and the amendment as it was adopted by this body just a few moments ago does exactly that. It charges the expert agencies identified by this body with the promulgation of rules, with simply periodically reviewing those rules and determining whether or not they're necessary. That presents no issue of nullification. This body sunsets entire agencies from time to time by acts of the legislature, and before a rule is sunsetted under this provision or under the amendment just adopted, an act of this body is necessary to make that happen. The amendment on the floor now purports to undo the process just adopted by this body 5 minutes ago. I encourage a no vote, Mr. Speaker.
With other members desiring to speak to the amendment before I recognize the lady from the 51st to close debate. Lady from the 51st.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I do want to thank the chair and the gentleman from Clay and also the clerk staff for allowing me to put this amendment in. It got in a little bit late. There was a miscommunication between me and staff, and I appreciate the opportunity to debate this because I do think it is an important debate. I do not believe that this amendment turns the bill on its head, and I don't think that it's inconsistent with the prior amendment. I do want every rule looked at. I think it's a good exercise to have every rule looked at every 5 years, and this amendment won't stop that. All this amendment does is say that we have to act. We have to either say the rule should be amended, the rule should be eliminated, or the rule should be continued. That's the only thing that this amendment would do. I don't think it's harmful. I think it ensures that we don't lose federal funding or that we don't lose a rule that we through inadvertence. And I urge adoption, and I do very much appreciate the courtesy that has been shown me and the working together spirit, but I do think this process would be better if it, and more likely to be constitutional if we require the legislature to act every 5 years. And it will also prompt each one of us before we vote to say, are these the rules that we should continue? Are these the rules we should reject? So I urge passage of the amendment. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Question for the House is the adoption of the amendment. Those in favor will say aye. Those opposed will say no. Noes appear to have it. Noes do have it. Declare the amendment rejected. Are there further amendments? Not the bill be engrossed and advanced to third reading. Further bills on second reading.
Committee substitute for House Bill 4007 relating generally to appointment of attorneys to assist the Attorney General.
Are there amendments?
Delegate Schott moves to amend the bill on page 2, section 3, line 12 by striking.
Gentleman from the 27th asks unanimous consent to explain the amendment of having it read. Is there objection? Chair is none. Gentleman from the 27th.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is a technical amendment to clear up two grammatical issues in the committee substitute that will be considered tomorrow. The first part of the amendment deletes an extraneous word in section 3, and the second part of the amendment inserts a word that was inadvertently omitted from section 3A. Again, this amendment is simply technical cleanup. I urge adoption.
Are there other members desiring to speak to the adoption of the amendment? Not the question before the House is the adoption of the amendment. Those in favor will say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. Declare the amendment adopted. Are there further amendments? Not the bill be engrossed and advanced to third reading.
Committee substitute for House Bill 4031, requiring agencies to respond to public comments received during the rulemaking process.
Are there amendments?
Delegates Howe, Sabonia, and Fritsch move to amend the bill. On page 3.
Gentleman from the 56 asks unanimous consent to explain the amendment in lieu of having it read. Is there objection? Chair hears none. Gentleman from 56.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The floor amendment amends the bill on page 3, section 6, line 50 by striking subsection C and replacing it with a new subsection which states that the Legislative Rulemaking Review Committee may review a proposed rule to determine if the agency adequately responded to any public comments received during the public comment period. If the committee believes that the agency's response was inadequate, it may recommend that the legislature not authorize the proposed rule. I urge adoption.
Are there other members desiring to speak to the adoption of the amendment? Not the question before the House is the adoption of the amendment. All those in favor will say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. I declare the amendment adopted. Are there further amendments? If not, the bill will be engrossed and advanced to third reading. Bills on first reading.
House Bill 2147, requiring the Circuit Court, when appointing counsel for alleged protected persons, to make appointments from a listing of all interested and qualified attorneys in the circuit.
Bill be advanced.
House Bill 2584, allowing a judge to excuse a potential juror from jury duty until a later date based on seasonal employment.
Bill be advanced.
Committee substitute for House Bill 2588, relating to the filing of financial statements with the Secretary of State.
Bill be advanced.
House Bill 2796, providing paid leave for certain state officers and employees during a declared state of emergency.
Bill be advanced.
Committee substitute for House Bill 2800, adding law enforcement officers' contact information and names of family members to the list of exemptions from public records requests.
Bill be advanced.
Committee substitute for House Bill 4038, relating to insurance requirement for the refilling of topical eye medication.
Bill be advanced. Leaves of absence. Gentleman from the 58th.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. For our colleagues, delegates Arvon, Hornbuckle, Manchin, and Moore.
The objection leave will be granted. Remarks by members of the House. The gentleman from the 24th, Delegate Phillips.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ladies and gentlemen, I gave you a gift this morning, some sunscreen. I worry about you. You got global warming going on. It's not cold outside. It's in your mind. But as you travel home this weekend, I want to make sure that you're protected from global warming or climate change, whatever it is today. I personally call it Mother Nature. I was going to get you a pair of Maui Gems, but a little expensive. But anyway, I just wanted to make sure everybody got this and why I gave it to you. And when you leave here, go down the 2 doors and get you a biscuit. Thank you.
The gentleman from the 19th, Delegate Perdue.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I wish the good gentleman would quit maligning Tudor's biscuits. Ladies and gentlemen, these brief remarks are going to be confined to present Senate Bill 6. And it's coming over. Try as I may, it's difficult to stomach the implications and the misinformation surrounding the drug test for welfare recipients bill that have received bipartisan support. The myth is that poor people become addicted more often than anyone else. The greater myth is that our state DHHR says we have the resources and available facilities to effectively treat the supposed 390 people we might uncover. I would note that if anyone swallows that line, we probably need to drug test them. Recovery from long-term substance abuse requires long-term treatment, and I'm not talking about mere substitution of one addictive element for another. We don't have the capacity at this date to effectively treat, repeat, effectively treat, the thousands of people we have now who aren't poor, aren't on welfare, who don't present outward signs of drug abuse. Pray tell, how are we to prioritize 390 beds or available programs for those we discover? The fact is that the only criteria needed to open the door for drug testing is that you be poor, out of work, and because it is TANF, seeking employment or the training needed to get a job. The fact is that the subject polls well to an uninformed public. It polls well. The fact is that democracy's most sacred principle, that all men and women shall be treated equally under the law. It's being usurped by a poll and driven by political expediency. Of course, we should offer assistance to those who need it. Of course, we need to do all in our power to reduce the scourge of substance abuse. But we can't simply put the blame on poverty, declare victory, and go home to a community that's still rotting from within. For more than a decade now, I've seen our state's leaders deny the obvious because it costs too much. This bill seeks to keep the blinders on and react to what we feel rather than what we know. If the Fourth Amendment stands for one, it stands for all. If it fails for one, no matter his or her circumstances, it fails for all. Declaring that one class must be quarantined because all classes have a disease is a failure of justice in the face of calamity. The one thing this state and this country has stood guard against for more than 200 years. We've simply got to be bigger and more principled than that. Thank you.
Gentleman from the 22nd, Delegate Moffitt.
I rise today because we've discussed some of the budget issues we have and some of the proposals that the governor put forth. And I was touched by a number of emails I received yesterday, but one in particular from Miss Sally and Miss Maxine here, both from Hurricane. There are two seniors that are living on a fixed income. They are very threatened by the 6% increase on the cell phone bill. And I think we need to urge our Finance Committee and our members to work to pass a budget, a balanced budget, without tax increases on those seniors. Thank you.
Further remarks by members? Miscellaneous business. Gentleman from the 58th.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And just for the members' information, it's the plan due to the storm, the weather, the poor road conditions, and the safety of the members and staff and employees that we try to get out of town early tomorrow. I don't expect there will be any committee meetings tomorrow afternoon, and the floor session for the House will be 9 a.m. tomorrow. So, Mr. Speaker, subject to announcements, I move the House adjourn until 9 a.m. tomorrow.
Gentleman from the 27th, Delegate Schott.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In view of the early session tomorrow and the impending bad weather, there will not be a meeting of the Judiciary Committee tomorrow at any time. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman from the 61st, Delegate Duke.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Legislative Oversight Commission on Education Accountability, LOCIA, will again meet today at 5 p.m. in the Senate Finance Committee room for those members that are on that committee and for anyone else who may be interested to attend that committee meeting to receive reports. Thank you.
Gentleman from the 64th, Delegate Householder.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Committee on Finance will not meet tomorrow, Friday, January 22nd. Will not meet. Thank you.
Gentleman from the 56th, Delegate Howe.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We were going to have a GovOrg meeting at 5 a.m. but decided against it. We will not meet tomorrow.
Be the least attended GovOrg meeting in history. Okay. The lady from the 49th, Delegate Summers.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Committee on Health and Human Resources will meet today at 2 o'clock in room 215E. The agenda is posted. The Republican members will caucus at 1:30 in the chairman's office. Thank you.
Gentleman from 53rd, Delegate Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Due to the bad cold weather, the Energy Committee will meet today at 2 o'clock in the House Judiciary Committee. We take up various rule bills, and the agenda will be posted. Thank you.
The gentleman from the 35th, Delegate Stansberry.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Your Sportsman's Caucus will not meet tomorrow at lunchtime. We had originally talked about having a meeting tomorrow, but due to the weather, we're going to postpone that, and we will meet next Thursday at lunchtime. So put that on your calendar. Sportsman's Caucus will meet next Thursday at noon in the Gov Org room. Thank you.
The gentleman from the 48th, Delegate Hamrick.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Your Republican members of the Committee on Roads and Transportation will meet today at 1 p.m. in the chairman's office.
The gentleman from the 10th, Delegate Azinger.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In order that we can pray for everybody to have a safe trip home, the prayer caucus will meet 5 minutes before 9 tomorrow morning.
Gentleman from the 23rd, Delegate Nelson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In honor of the excellent display of bipartisanship we've had today, I would like to ask that my friend from the 19th comments be recorded in the appendix of the journal.
Without objection, the remarks will be printed in the appendix of the journal. Gentleman from 37th, Delegate Pushkin. The lady from the 51st, Delegate Fleischauer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Point of inquiry. Will we be taking up bills tomorrow morning?
The plan at this point is to proceed with the counter. There may be, depending on the number of members here, we may revisit that, but at this point it is the plan to proceed with the calendar tomorrow.
Okay, thank you very much.
Lady from the 43rd, Delegate Campbell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Your Democratic members of your Committee of Health will caucus today at 1:30 in room 252. Thank you.
Gentleman from the 50th, Delegate Caputo.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Democratic members of the House will caucus immediately upon adjournment in 252 across the hall.
Gentleman from the 58th.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ladies and gentlemen, we've been joined in the back of the chamber by our Doctor of the Day. With us is Dr. Joe Reedy of Buchanan. If the House will make the good doctor welcome.
Further announcements. Gentleman from 37th, Delegate Pushkin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd ask unanimous consent to the remarks or the comments in favor of the amendment from the gentlelady from the 51st be recorded in the appendix of the journal.
Without objection, the remarks will be printed in the appendix of the journal. Further announcements. If not, the question for the House is a motion by the gentleman from the 58th that the House stand adjourned until 9 a.m. tomorrow. All those in favor will say aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. Declare the House adjourned until 9 a.m. tomorrow.
You've been tuned to coverage of the West Virginia Legislature on the West Virginia Channel. A review of what the proceedings were today in the Senate. After 90 minutes of floor speeches, the Senate passed Senate Bill 1, the West Virginia Workplace Freedom Act. On party lines, 17 to 16. That bill now goes to the House for its consideration. The House today passed House Bill 2101, which eliminates some obsolete government entities on a vote of 96 to 0. Due to the impending snowstorm, the House of Delegates will convene at 9 a.m. tomorrow morning. The Senate will meet at 10 a.m. These floor sessions will be brief, so lawmakers can travel. We will bring you those proceedings here on the West Virginia Channel tomorrow morning. And this concludes today's broadcast of the West Virginia Legislature on the West Virginia Channel. This program reminder, the Legislature Today, our nightly broadcast of legislative news and information, airs at 6:30 and 11:30 every weeknight on West Virginia PBS. Tonight's guests are Minority Leaders, Senator Jeff Kessler and Delegate Tim Miley. The Legislature Today will also be repeated weeknights at 10 and weekday mornings at 6:30 here on the West Virginia Channel. I'm Beth Voorhees for the West Virginia Channel, a service of West Virginia Public Broadcasting.
Thank you.